Most people think compounding is slow. That's only true, until it isn't. We're taught the same idea from the moment we start working: keep grinding, keep investing, keep sacrificing, and one day, far in the future, you'll finally be okay. Maybe at 65. Maybe later. The assumption is that progress is always linear, that saving will always feel heavy, and that freedom only comes after decades of effort. But that story leaves out the most important part. There is a moment where the math quietly flips. A moment where your money starts doing more work than you ever could. Early on, every dollar in your account comes directly from you. Your paycheck funds it. Your discipline grows it. Miss a contribution and everything slows down. Progress feels fragile. You feel like you're pushing a boulder uphill. That's why so many people question whether investing even works. But what's really happening is that compounding hasn't shown up yet. In the beginning, growth is small because the base is small. Time hasn't had a chance to stack on itself. Then slowly, year after year, those old dollars begin to matter. Returns start earning returns. Gains stack on top of gains. And one day, without any dramatic event, the balance shifts. Your portfolio adds money even when you don't. Growth begins to rival effort. Then it quietly surpasses it. Most people never notice this moment when it happens. They're still stuck thinking they're decades away from freedom, still operating like every dollar depends entirely on their next paycheck. But this is the exact point where saving stops feeling endless and starts feeling inevitable. By the end of this video, you'll know how to identify that moment for yourself, how to tell whether compounding is already pulling more weight than you realize, and why doubt usually peaks right before this shift happens. This isn't motivation. It's not hype. It's not a promise of overnight freedom. It's just math playing out over time. And once you understand where this moment sits, investing stops feeling like guesswork and starts feeling like aim. When people hear the phrase, your money working for you, it usually sounds vague or unrealistic. They picture passive income, quitting their job, or money magically showing up without effort. That misunderstanding causes a lot of frustration, because when real life doesn't match that fantasy, people assume investing isn't working. In reality, money working for you has nothing to do with lifestyle changes. It's a math relationship between what you add and what your portfolio earns on its own. In the early years, your contributions completely dominate the outcome. If you invest $1,000 a month, that $12,000 a year is almost the entire reason your balance grows. Market returns exist, but they're small compared to what you're putting in. That's why progress feels slow and why missing a few months feels devastating. Everything still depends on you. But those early dollars don't disappear once they're invested. They stay there, compounding quietly. Each year, they earn returns, and those returns stay invested too. At first, the effect is barely noticeable. Then, gradually, it starts to add up. Growth becomes less symbolic and more meaningful. Your account starts increasing even in months when you don't change anything. This is the transition most people misunderstand. They think investing suddenly starts working one day, when in reality it has been working the entire time. The difference is scale. As the base grows, time becomes more powerful than effort. You're still contributing, but your contribution is no longer the only driver. This is why the early phase feels heavy and unrewarding, while later phases feel lighter even if you're doing less. It's not because you became smarter or more disciplined. It's because compounding finally has enough mass to matter. And once growth starts carrying its own weight, the entire emotional experience of saving begins to change. This is where everything clicks, and it comes down to what's called the crossover point. The crossover point is the year your investments grow by more than you personally add. It's not a feeling. It's not motivation. It's a number you can see on paper. Imagine you're investing $1,000 a month. That's $12,000 a year coming directly from you. Early on, your portfolio might only grow a few thousand on its own, so your effort clearly dominates. You are the engine. But year after year, every dollar you've invested stays in the system. Those old contributions earn returns, and then those returns start earning returns too. Slowly, the gap begins to close. One year your portfolio grows 8,000. Then 10. Then 15. Eventually, something subtle happens. You look at the numbers and realize your investments added more money this year than you did. Without extra hours. Without saving more. Growth quietly passed effort. This moment rarely feels dramatic because it doesn't come with fireworks or headlines. You don't wake up rich. You don't stop working the next day. But mathematically, the rules have changed. From this point forward, time matters more than discipline. Momentum matters more than hustle. Your portfolio begins pulling weight on its own, and every year after that, growth tends to accelerate faster than contributions ever could. This is why people who stay consistent long enough suddenly feel like things are moving quickly, while everyone else thinks they got lucky. They didn't. They just reached the part of the curve where compounding becomes visible. And once you cross this line, the stress around saving usually drops. Not because you're done, but because you're no longer doing all the heavy lifting by yourself. The system finally starts working with you instead of needing to be pushed every step of the way. To understand why this moment feels so powerful, it helps to picture what's actually happening over time. Think of it like a seesaw. On one side is your effort, your monthly contributions, your discipline, your restraint. On the other side is growth, returns compounding on everything you've already invested. In the beginning, your side is heavy. Every month you sit down, move money, and push the balance higher yourself. Growth barely lifts its end at all. That's why progress feels slow and why missing a few contributions feels like a setback. But the seesaw doesn't stay balanced forever. Every year, more weight gets added to the growth side. All those past contributions stack up, and time keeps pressing down on them. At first, the movement is subtle. You might not even notice it from year to year. But eventually, the seesaw starts to tilt. Growth doesn't need as much help anymore. Your portfolio begins rising even in months when nothing changes. This is also why people often feel the most doubt right before things improve. The early phase requires the most patience, but offers the least feedback. Then once the shift happens, progress starts showing up faster than expected. This isn't because markets suddenly became generous. It's because compounding finally has enough scale to express itself. The frustrating part is that this phase can feel boring while it's happening. There's no dramatic milestone. Just numbers slowly drifting upward. But looking back, this is the stretch that determines everything. Once growth begins outweighing effort, the pressure eases. Saving no longer feels like dragging yourself forward. It starts feeling like steering something that already has momentum. That's the difference most people miss. They think freedom comes from a single big decision or a lucky break. In reality, it comes from staying in the system long enough for the weight to shift. And once it does, progress stops depending entirely on how hard you push and starts depending more on how long you stay invested. This is where people usually bring up a number like $300,000 or $500,000, and that's where a lot of misunderstanding starts. Those numbers aren't magic, and they aren't requirements. They're simply ranges where many people start noticing a real shift. The important part isn't the amount itself. It's what changes when growth becomes meaningful. At lower balances, market returns feel small because there isn't much for them to work on. But as the base grows, even average returns start producing noticeable dollar amounts. A normal market year can suddenly add more than a full year of contributions. That's when the psychology changes. You stop checking your account every month to see if your deposit went through, and you start noticing what the portfolio is doing on its own. This shift can happen earlier or later depending on your savings rate, your timeline, and the market environment. The pattern is what matters, not the exact number. Around this stage, people often feel a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Relief because the pressure eases, and disbelief because progress finally feels real. This is also when financial decisions start to feel less desperate. You're no longer racing just to build something from nothing. You're managing something that already has momentum. That's why stress tends to drop even if nothing about your lifestyle changes. The math starts working quietly in the background. And once you experience this phase, it becomes much easier to stay consistent. Not because you suddenly love saving more, but because you can see that time is doing some of the work for you. This is the point where investing stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like positioning. You're no longer just trying to survive the process. You're setting yourself up to let compounding finish the job. Once you reach this stage, a natural question comes up. What happens if you slow down, or even stop contributing for a while? Early on, that idea feels terrifying because everything depends on your input. If you stop adding money in the beginning, progress nearly stops. But after the crossover point, the system behaves differently. Growth has its own momentum. That doesn't mean contributions don't matter anymore, but it does mean they're no longer the only thing keeping things moving. Imagine someone who's built enough of a base that their portfolio is already growing by tens of thousands a year. If they pause contributions for a year, the account doesn't freeze. It continues compounding on what's already there. In some years, it may even grow more than it did while they were contributing. This is where pressure starts to ease. You realize that your future doesn't collapse the moment life interrupts your plan. You can change jobs, take a break, or redirect cash temporarily without feeling like everything is at risk. That flexibility is what people actually mean when they talk about freedom. It's not about never working again. It's about not being trapped by a single path. This phase is also where guilt around saving begins to fade. You stop feeling like every uninvested dollar is a failure. Instead, you start thinking in terms of long-term positioning. Your portfolio becomes something you manage, not something you constantly have to feed. That mindset shift is subtle but powerful. It's the difference between feeling chased by the future and feeling prepared for it. And while contributions still help and still accelerate progress, they're no longer carrying the entire load. Time and growth have officially become real partners in the process. This is where a concept like coast fire often comes up, and it's worth clearing up what that actually means. It's not about quitting your job. It's not about living off investments tomorrow. And it's definitely not about chasing an internet lifestyle. Coast fire is simply a way of describing a point where you've done enough early work that time can handle the rest. You've built a base large enough that, even if you stopped contributing today, it could reasonably grow to support you later. The key word there is grow, not pay. You're not pulling money out. You're letting compounding keep doing what it does best. What changes at this stage isn't your income, it's your mindset. Work becomes less urgent. Decisions feel less pressured. You're no longer saving out of fear that you'll fall behind. You're saving because you choose to move faster. This framing matters because it keeps expectations realistic. Coast fire isn't an endpoint. It's a checkpoint. It's a way to measure progress and reduce anxiety, not a rule that says you should stop working or stop contributing. For many people, contributions continue simply because they want to accelerate the timeline or build a larger margin of safety. But the mental shift is real. You understand that you've already cleared the hardest part of the path. Time is no longer working against you. It's working with you. That understanding alone changes how people relate to their jobs, their spending, and their future. You stop making decisions from a place of panic and start making them from a place of control. And that's why this concept matters, even if you never use the label. It gives structure to a feeling many people experience but can't explain, the moment when freedom stops being a vague idea and starts feeling mathematically inevitable. At this stage, the most important question isn't how much you've invested, but how to tell whether you're actually close. The signs aren't flashy, but they're consistent. One of the first is that your portfolio starts growing noticeably year to year, even when your contributions stay the same. You look back 12 months and realize the increase didn't come mainly from what you added. Another sign is that market swings don't feel as emotional anymore. When your balance is small, every dip feels personal. When growth is carrying more weight, volatility becomes something you observe, not something you fear. You also start noticing that your savings rate matters less than it used to. Early on, increasing contributions feels urgent. Later, time and consistency do more of the heavy lifting. This is often when doubt peaks. People assume something must be wrong because progress feels too quiet. But quiet progress is exactly what compounding looks like when it's working. Another clear signal is when projections stop feeling abstract. You can run conservative numbers and still see a path forward. The future no longer depends on perfect behavior or perfect markets. It depends on staying invested. That's a major shift. And finally, there's a subtle emotional change. You stop obsessing over the finish line and start focusing on positioning. You don't need everything to go right. You just need to avoid pulling out too early. When these signs show up together, it usually means you're past the hardest part. You're no longer building momentum from scratch. You're protecting and guiding something that already has it. And that's why people who reach this phase often say it feels anticlimactic in the moment, but powerful in hindsight. Nothing dramatic happens. You just realize the system is finally working without constant effort. Remember how we're told from the beginning that the only path is to grind until 65. That if you don't push non-stop, you'll fall behind. That story isn't completely wrong, but it's incomplete. What it leaves out is the moment when effort stops being the main driver and time takes over. Financial freedom isn't an age. It's not a feeling. It's a math problem that unfolds over time. And once you understand where that turning point sits, everything becomes clearer. You stop guessing. You stop wondering whether this is even working. You stop feeling like you're sacrificing endlessly with no payoff in sight. Instead, you're aiming for a specific moment where momentum becomes inevitable. That doesn't mean you stop working or stop contributing the second you hit it. It means your future is no longer fragile. Small mistakes don't derail the plan. Life interruptions don't undo years of progress. You're no longer dependent on perfect behavior to succeed. That's the real freedom people are chasing, whether they realize it or not. And the most important part is that this moment comes earlier than most people expect, but only if they stay consistent long enough to reach it. Compounding doesn't reward intensity. It rewards patience. Once you see that, investing stops feeling like an endless grind and starts feeling like alignment. You're no longer forcing progress. You're letting the system do what it was designed to do. And when that happens, retirement stops being some abstract future event and becomes a predictable outcome. Not because you hoped for it, but because the math made it unavoidable.